Hi beautiful souls, it's Tan here again today with another video in our Zodiac Degrees series. And today we're going to be looking at if you have anything in your natal chart, approaching this from an astrological perspective, at Aries 26.22 degrees to Taurus 2 degrees. And if you're approaching this from a human design or a gene keys perspective, this is in accordance to gene key number 3. So if you haven't seen my introduction video to this series, I highly recommend that you watch that first. So I'll leave a link to that in the up above in the description box below to kind of get a more comprehensive understanding of how I'm approaching this series, and then you can come back and watch this video. With this particular Zodiac Degrees, gene key, and human design gate, you're moving from chaos to innovation to innocence. This is the end of the island mentality, to becoming a being in which there is no work and it's all play. So your dream arc totem bird vision key is going to be the Puffin. At the fear key level, it's going to be the adder, and at the life key, it's the Coyote. At the vision key bird totem, it is the Puffin. In the 64 I-Ching hexagrams, this hexagram is called difficulty at the beginning. It is water over thunder. This I-Ching is about communicating realization. The genetic codon associated with this is leucine. It's a genetic codon that's actually used by the skeletal muscles for exercise energy, and is part of the ring of life and death in the gene keys. The programming partner of this gate and archetype is gate and gene key number 50. So the programming partner is going to represent kind of the opposite point of this particular Zodiac Degrees. So that's going to be Libra 26.22 degrees to Scorpio at 2 degrees. That's gate 50 and gene key 50. It offers a complement and a balance to this particular energy. In human design, this gate is in the sacral center. It is the gate of mutation, part of channel 360 in the stream of creativity. So, some interesting facts about the Puffin. I absolutely love the Puffin. I think it's such a cute creature. They're actually nicknamed the clown of the sea because they're just really funny creatures. They're funny in many different ways, from the way they walk, the way they take off into flight, and just their behavior in general. They like to play. The really interesting thing about their anatomy is that they've got webbed feet, kind of like ducks and other water birds have. But at the same time, they can dive much deeper than ducks can. They can dive like penguins, but they can fly as well, whereas penguins can't. So they're kind of this interesting multi-mixture of different types of seabirds. But they're kind of more adaptable to different types of conditions in the wild. What makes them kind of different from other birds is that instead of kind of taking in fish and then regurgitating that to their youngs in order to feed it, which is what a lot of birds do, the Puffin actually, their beak is actually designed to be able to hold several fishes at the same time in one go. So they don't have to take in the food first and then regurgitate to their young. They just feed the fish kind of still in the flesh. And their beak is what makes them very interesting creatures, because their beak shape, size, and colors can indicate their age. And during the mating season, they become extremely bright and colorful. But after the mating season, especially in the winter, they kind of shed their beak and it becomes a little bit more dull. It has recently been discovered that a Puffin's beak is actually fluorescent. So we can actually see them in the dark and they glow. And this is actually common in birds because birds' eyes can actually see UV rays. But a lot of the more fluorescent part of birds' bodies is usually in their feathers. But with the Puffin, it's with regards to their beak. Something that a lot of birds, when they would like to mate or attract a partner, what they would do is they would kind of show off their feathers. So it's something that always remains with them, but they kind of choose to show it when they want to. But when it comes to the puffin, they kind of don't have much of a choice, meaning that when they have to mate, their beaks just become more colorful on their own. But when that's over, they completely shed it. So it's letting that part of them go completely. They don't always hold it like, a peacock would, and then a peacock would kind of fan out when they want to mate, right? To attract a partner. The puffin actually sheds that part of themselves completely, and then it regains it again during the mating season. So it's got that kind of mutative quality about it with regards to its beak. Puffins generally spend 2/3 of their life at sea, and they only come to shore or to a particular chosen island when they would like to mate, and during the breeding season, and to lay eggs, and they generally lay just 1 egg per year. It is known that puffins will raise this young chick until they're old enough to leave the colony, and then the parents would leave the puffin on their own to kind of fend for themselves. So the young puffin kind of has a little bit of a difficult life because their parents will leave them pretty early on to make their way on their own, and also because they generally don't have siblings because they would lay 1 egg. They're kind of having to fend for themselves since very, very young. Puffins can also be pretty, I don't know if I would consider this creative or innovative or just picky, but in their burrows, they don't release their feces there. They generally make a separate toilet outside their burrows just to keep the burrows clean. So they're kind of innovative, definitely. So I think this is something very cute with the puffins. So if you have this archetype in your astrology chart, if it rules any of your planets, or if it rules any of your angles or points, or if you have this in the gene key or in the human design, you're definitely somebody who is able to fight for your struggles. You're going to be somebody who maybe there was a certain amount of independence required from you when you were very young. Maybe you had to have a certain amount of time in your youth where you were separated from your parents and was kind of left alone. But you finally kind of grow out of the struggle later on in your life to be like the puffin, where they actually manage to find a mate, have a family of their own, but they still require a lot of independence, being at sea away from this family life, because that's how the puffin grew up, remember? So that's gonna kind of be some of your traits, as well as because you have such a maybe harder way to start off your life, there could be certain fears that creeps in about not being able to survive in the world early on in your life. And this is true for all human beings, that if we are kind of filled with a lot of fears, we tend to adopt maybe some controlling or forceful behaviors because we want to make sure that our life is going to go according to plan. We don't want to lose control because we feel that we're not going to survive without it. The controlling nature that may come up is kind of to prevent against chaos, which is the lower vibration of this energy. But sometimes it may not manifest as controlling behavior. It may be expressed as repressed anger that comes out in the form of projection within your environment and the people around you. And anger is actually coming from fear. That's where it's coming from, because we're fear that we're not going to have control over the environment, so the energy is going to come out a little bit forceful, seeming like anger to the people around you in your environment. So the vision of your highest self, if you have this archetype is the start, the initiator of what is known to be the essence, shall we say, of innovation. Practically in life, it can be about deconditioning or moving away from your parents' genetic pool, your parents' gene pool, to build a new conditioning within your actual life, body, way of being, mind, that is authentically yours. And through that, you may be somebody who has to establish some kind of rules or law or create a certain amount of order to be able to establish this new part of yourself for yourself that is independent of your family. But at the highest level, what you can actually become is you can actually have an actual mutation of your cells and your DNA. So this particular Zodiac Degrees, Gene Key, and Human Design Gate at the start initially represents the single cell membrane. You know, Aries is the first sign of the zodiac, right? And it rules the first house in astrology. So it's representative of the single unit. In this case, it's the single cell. In a cell, we would typically consider the nucleus to be the brain of the cell. But new quantum biology has recently discovered that the brain of a cell may not actually be the nucleus. It may actually be the cell membrane of a cell. So what does this mean? If the brain of a cell is actually the nucleus, it means that the purpose of a cell is to make sure that it stays alive on its own. There's a certain amount of competitiveness. So because the brain of the cell is functioning for that one particular cell and it's keeping that one particular cell alive. But if the brain of a cell is actually the cell membrane, so it's the surface of the cell, it's embedded within the outer surface of the cell. In order to keep this particular cell alive, the brain of the cell would have to work in accordance with adaptation to the environment, meaning that it has to filter what is going to enter into the cell, and what it chooses to have filtered into the cell will influence and affect what the cell is going to actually become. So therefore, the function of the brain of the cell and the cell itself isn't actually to control, to survive through control, but it is to survive through cooperation with the environment. So this would actually mean that we have free will and we have the ability for empowerment. Because if you think about it, if we think of ourselves or the cell, irrespective of the environment, let's say you put the cell in a particular environment, the cell is then going to be immediately conditioned by the environment because it has to see itself as separate from that environment. So let's say you put a white cell in a black box, right? The cell has to immediately say to itself, I have to be white in order to survive in the black box. That's the control. So with this kind of old mentality, the cell, yourself, your life has little free will. You feel in chaos, like there's no way to survive, there's no way to go, there's only one thing to do, and that is to push through to survive. And that is not giving yourself free will. But if you put this white cell, this is an example, in a black box, and the brain of the cell is cooperative, it will say that, oh, I'm in a black box. What should I do with regards to knowing that I'm in a black box to survive through cooperation? Maybe I can adapt and be gray, but I don't have to be. Maybe I can adapt and be different shades of black and white together. So therefore, you have a choice now, because you're not controlling, but you're adapting. I hope it's kind of making sense, guys. So chaos, which is equivalent to difficulty at the beginning, I see this as an old paradigm of the single cell needing to be in competition. If we look at the world today, in the world, we have a lot of chaos because there's a lot of separation, because there's a lot of need to control. We're living in the old paradigm. But this gene key wants to bring itself and ultimately the world into the new paradigm of adaptation. So what's actually happening, right, in the kind of the way that human beings have evolved and cells have evolved, it always starts off as a single cell, but it has evolved to become multicellular through adaptation. When you realize, if you have this particular archetype, that you have to adapt, the best way to adapt is to innovate, because now you can be anything you want to be. You can bring anything new into the world. And the best form of innovation comes from being a complete blank page. It comes from the innocence, which is the highest level of your destiny here. innocence. Innocence creates the best form of innovation. When you become a totally blank page, it's like when you're a child. The child has no preconceived notions or biases about the world. The child sees the world with fresh new eyes, and therefore the child is a blank page. And when the child is a blank page, that's why they're so creative and they're willing to allow any new ideas to come to them and then share that with the world without any fear. Because there's no feeling like you're going to be judged or no feeling like you're not going to survive. Because you don't know that you don't know what's going to happen when you do bring out this new idea into the world. A child doesn't know this. There's no preconceived expectations about it. This is cooperation. This is cooperation with the environment, like the cell membrane that is allowing of frequencies in the environment to filter into the cell. And so if you've watched my introduction video to this series, you remember that I talked about how we can actually change the vibration of the electromagnetic fields in our DNA so that we can unlock the higher level, the higher frequency of our DNA. This is what we're talking about here. And this is why this gene key, this archetype, this gate, this zodiac degrees is the start of it. It's the initiation process of the collective mutation. So when we talk about the age of Aquarius and becoming a Uranian being, the Saturnian being that has been a part of the human survival and the human body for many, many years, since the beginning of time, is one where the brain is in the cranium or the brain. And that's like the brain being the nucleus of a single cell. But when it comes to becoming the Uranian being, the idea is that our brains are shifting from the cranium and the actual brain into the solar plexus part of the body. And this is all dependent on how we use our brain. The solar plexus of the human body is representative of the cell membrane of a single cell unit, because what the solar plexus does is it's the part of the body that controls the frequencies that enter the body from the environment. So this is how all of this symbolism is lining up. And when we can work to make the solar plexus our brain, we are going to be able to unlock the highest destiny hidden in our DNA. It's already within all of us, and this is how we unlock it. So that means that if you have this archetype, you're very important in this mutation process of becoming a Uranian being in the age of Aquarius. And if you could work with it, you're somebody who can spread the way that this works to the world. And when we actually think about it, this is actually very logical in a sense that we sometimes perceive human beings as being superior to animals because we think that, our brains are bigger in ratio with our body and the way that it works, the way that we use our brain. Therefore, we've got to be superior to animals. We've got to be more important. And therefore, we also tend to think between human beings as well, that if somebody is using their brain better than other people, for example, or is more intelligent, that they must somehow be more important or must have more of a functioning or a role in society. But the fact that we human beings have more intelligence than an animal doesn't necessarily mean that we are more superior to animals. Because my question here is, would you say that there is more chaos in the natural world, or is there more chaos in the world of human beings? Do animals have more chaos in the way they live, or do we have more chaos in our world right now? I think we all know the answer to that question, and it's because we've put reliance too much on thinking that the cranium of the brain is actually the brain, and we're no longer cooperating with our environment. We're living through survival and fear of not being able to survive. We are functioning as having a nucleus being the brain of our cell. The animals in the animal world, they're functioning with their cell membrane as being the brain of their cell. And therefore, this age of Aquarius is shifting our brain to having the cell membrane be considered the brain of our cell, and the solar plexus then being the brain of our body. The solar plexus rules the emotional waves that's going on there. In human design, the different gates in the solar plexus represents how we work with our emotional wave. And when functioning at the highest level of it, of course there's struggles and difficulties when we're working at the lower vibration of the solar plexus, which means that we get stuck in our emotions. We act on our emotions. But if we could transcend that, we act on compassion, we act from a place of peace, we act from love and understanding, and that is cooperation with the environment. When you are at the innocence level of this particular archetype, you will see that life has been a joke. It's funny. That's why the Puffin is the clown of the sea. They're funny creatures. Just like if you have this in your chart, you're a funny person. You know that life is a joke deep from within you. You're funny from deep within, not on a superficial level. But you take everything very much lightly, and you can make people laugh because nothing really weighs you down that much. And by the way, guys, my dad actually has this gene key as his son. He's a very funny person. He struggled so much at the beginning of his life, but he's now at peace, and he hardly ever gets upset about anything, and he makes everybody laugh. He literally, I'm not even joking. We have a family group in our Line. I don't know if you know Line app. It's very famous here in Thailand, but we have a family group in Line, and I'm not joking about this. Every sentence that he writes in that group, or every other sentence he writes in that group, he's making some kind of joke. And we don't know where he got these ideas from, but they just make us laugh. Like, he just makes us laugh all the time, because now when he's at kind of after his retirement days, he knows that life is a joke. The rules that we make for ourselves, the systems that we have, the laws of the government that we have made, I mean, they're definitely necessary. But what if they weren't there? What if we simply just are, and we just simply live? The nature of consciousness is innocence. The nature of consciousness keeps exploring, it keeps moving, and it keeps changing. It cannot be consciousness if it doesn't do that, because with each different generation, each different period in history, it requires a new type of consciousness for that particular era. So consciousness has to shift, and it has to change. And so these new systems and laws that we have, they have to keep changing as well. And therefore, we can't be too attached to it. We have to know when to change and when we have to adapt. That's the power of innocence, allowing new things to come when it needs to come without fear. When you play, when you know that consciousness moves, we have genius. Genius is always something ahead of our time. It's always something that's innovative. And innovation can only come when we're ahead of the era or the limits of our society, which then requires trust. Trust that this new innovation that's coming into your head, that's coming into the world, it will bring order to the chaos. But also knowing that this is a cycle of innocence and corruption, meaning that we can start off with innocence, but the moment that we impose laws and regulations, there's always a chance of corruption. But we have to keep the cycle going, meaning that when you see that corruption happens, you can bring in the innocence again. And then we establish a new set of rules and laws, and corruption's going to happen after that. But then you can bring in more innocence again, and the cycle goes on. And that's kind of life, isn't it? So yeah, if you have this particular archetype, I highly recommend that you also check out my video on your programming partner, which is gate 50, gene key number 50, the zodiac sign of Libra from 26.22 degrees to Scorpio of 2 degrees. to kind of see how you can balance this, give more balance to this particular archetype. And yeah, that's it for today, beautiful souls. If you have this, leave in the comments below what your experiences have been. And if you like this video, then do give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button below if you haven't. If you already subscribed, then thank you very much for coming along. I do birth chart readings, synastry, and relationship readings. All the information is on my website. You can check that out. And yeah, I'll see you very soon, beautiful souls. Bye!